main thing is you have to win.
Ill intent, violence, physicality, pain. Enough is enough.
All right, welcome back to the Just Win podcast. We are joining you guys live today on a special episode. The Raiders just swung a huge trade for quarterback Geno Smith, and that's Vic Tafur. I'm Ted Nguyen, Tashan Reed. We're joined by our athletic Seahawks writer, Michael Sean Duggar. Thank you for joining us. How you doing, Michael?
I'm doing good, man. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah,
little Seahawks man-to-man Blue Wire collaboration right now, you know?
Yeah, man. My first time on. That was a dope-ass intro you guys had, too, by the way.
Okay. That was actually our old intro because we got Antonio Pierce quoting there. We have a new one with Marshawn Lynch kind of trolling Pete Carroll in the beginning, but we'll get that fixed. But yeah, the Raiders traded a third-round pick, their second third-round pick that they acquired from the Jets for Geno Smith. They were obviously in the market for a veteran quarterback. Didn't seem like they want to go to the rookie quarterback route. I mean, it does make sense with Pete Carroll being his age that they are an accelerated timeline and they're not interested in a rebuild. And they get a very competent quarterback in Geno Smith. I was a huge Geno fan before this trade. Michael, what can you tell us about Geno Smith?
And I like Geno. I thought he was overcoming his circumstances on the field far more than he was given credit for, particularly outside of Seattle, but also within the fan base. Like Geno was given bad O-lines pretty much every year. He played with competent O-linemen, I would say the first couple months of the 2022 season when he had rookie tackles in Charles Cross and Abe Lucas. And then Abe kind of hit a wall there towards the end of the year. I think he played Max Crosby and like Nick Bosa within like a 2-week stretch or something like that, which that'll cook you as a rookie. I'm not really tripping off that. But once Abe fell off, that's when Geno's numbers kind of dipped. And then last year, he just had bad offensive lines. His last two play callers have been fired. They've had no run game the last couple years. You know, I remember last year, Ryan Grubb, their former OC now, like after they lost to the Packers and DK had like 3 targets or whatever it was a season low. He called DK the next day, Ryan Grubb did, and like had to apologize for not getting DK the ball enough in that game. That was after he basically had to do the same thing with Ken Walker, their running back, in week 5 when they lost to the Giants. He's like, yeah, I didn't get Ken involved enough. Like, that's what you're dealing with. An OC in week 15 who has to apologize for not getting DK the ball. Like, my brother, I know you haven't coached in the NFL before, but by week 15, you should have a pretty concrete plan for getting DK Metcalf the ball. You shouldn't have to call and apologize like this is Pop Warner. And like that's what Geno has been dealing with. Not to say his OCs are completely trash, but there's a reason like neither one of them are currently OCs, Shane Waldrop being the other, in the NFL right now. So like between the pressure he's had to deal with, the burden on his shoulders in the offense, and to still put up like competent numbers over the last few years. Yeah, I think someone asked this for our Seahawks Man-to-Man podcast last night. It was like, who won the trade? I was like, dog, the Raiders in a landslide. The Raiders got a lot better today at the same cost it took to get Devontae Adams to New York. Come on, man. Spy Tech over there cooking right now.
I guess with that being said, I mean, you know, you spoke about how good you felt Geno has been the last few years for the Seahawks. What are they you wrote it today? What are they doing? Like, why did they trade Geno Smith?
It's this is my part of it is my fault. I asked Geno in week 18. I said, because Geno sees himself as a top tier quarterback. After they beat the Niners in week 11, he did an interview with Richard Sherman, and he was like, "Yo, I'm top tier. My film says it. My numbers say it. So I need the bag, essentially." So after week 18, when they beat the Rams, got to 10 wins, I was like, "Yo, you think you're top tier? Do you think the Seahawks think you're top tier?" He was like, "Yeah, I do." And I should have worded that differently. I should have asked, does John Schneider think you're top tier? Because I have no doubt Pete thought that. Actually, we know that now, but Pete thought that. Mike McDonald thought that. Clint Kubiak thinks that. Ryan Grubb thinks that Geno is one of them dudes. John, I don't think ever thought that. Like, even go back to when they traded Russ, they got Drew Lock back in the deal. They had Geno in their building for 3 years at the time. They didn't even sign Geno back on a minimum deal until like 2 weeks before the 2022 draft. Like they were not eager to get Geno back in the building. They thought they could do it with Drew Lock. And even after Geno had a really good season in 2022, that's just after being in their building now for like 4 years, goes to the Pro Bowl on the original ballot, balls out to get back to the playoffs. They basically gave him a big ass 1-year deal, a prove it joint that just basically masks a 3-year deal. This is while Daniel Jones over here in New York finessed 2 guarantee years out of the Giants. And I bring that up to say it never felt like John Snyder was on board with the Geno thing as much as the fans, as much as the teammates, as much as the coaches, like even just last combine, not this most recent one. John got up there with a straight face on camera and said, Geno Smith is our quarterback until he isn't. That's insane. That's not how you endorse somebody you love. What you mean? You might like if the athletic hit me and was like, yo, you are a Seahawks reporter until you're not, I'm about to go apply at the Ringer. Like that's a crazy thing to say. How am I gonna feel like you believe in me if that's the case? And the answer is that they didn't. So it doesn't surprise me at all that Geno thought he was worth X. The Seahawks thought he was worth Y. And they were like, dude, we're not paying you that. Call Pete, see if he will. And Pete was like, yeah, I'm with it. That makes sense to me. John never saw Geno the way Geno saw Geno. And that's how we get to this divorce.
To me, that begs the question, should you give a guy 34 years old the bag? I mean, is he going to be a guy who makes your team a lot better in the next couple of years at the price of, say, $45 million a year, I guess what we're talking about? I mean, obviously the Seahawks didn't think so. So my question is that really the right move for the Raiders at this point? I get the trade compensation is great. A 3rd-round pick for a starting quarterback, improved from last year. I get all that. I think it's a good move. But my question is, how much do you pay him? For how long? Is that really a smart move at this point where you are as a franchise?
Smart's kind of relative, I think, because you got to look at you guys know the context of your head coach. Your head coach is like twice Mike McDonald's age. Pete's turning 74, I think, in September. So, like, yeah, I can see him wanting to be like, we need to get like a baseline. Like, Geno can probably get you. The Raiders know right now, if nothing else, Geno probably get us to 7-8 wins. Like, just nothing else. Like, if we suck around him, he'll probably get us to 7-8. That is something I can see Pete striving for off rip. And then the contract, yeah, $45 million or whatever is a lot. But at the same time, if they were to give Geno $45 million a year, I don't know if they will. You guys would know better, but that's not even top 10 quarterback money right now. I think the 10th highest paid quarterback by APY average per year is Kyler at 46.1. So you're not even giving Geno top 10 money, and that's before we factor in if anybody else gets paid in this cycle, like Purdy or something like that. You're paying a borderline top 10 guy. I think maybe Geno's like 12th. You're paying him accordingly, honestly. So I think it'd be a decent move just to get the Raiders to competence, because that once you have that, you can do so much more. And if you can get it for a bargain like they're doing, like I think the Raiders are in such a good spot. It reminds me of 2012 for the Seahawks, actually. Pete's probably copying a little bit of that same formula. If you remember, they went out and gave Matt Flynn the bag, which I actually did the numbers this week. The equivalent of the Matt Flynn deal that the Seahawks gave him in 2012 after he basically just was a Week 17 wonder for the Packers, that would be a $45 million deal right now, what they gave him, the equivalent. So they did that and still drafted Russ in the 3rd round, but they felt like they didn't have to force a pick. They could just take the best player available in the 1st round, which that year was Bruce Irvin. And they were like, we don't even need to force a pick in the 2nd round. We can go take who we think is the best player, and that was Bobby Wagner. And then, okay, now we kind of like Russ. Maybe he's not ready to go right now, but we don't need him to be because we got Matt. I think Pete, whether he says it or not, is viewing this season the same way. Like, yeah, we got Geno. We love Geno. We'll pay Geno. But I'm about competing. If Jackson Dart or whatever is on the board at pick 68 or whatever the Raiders have, sure. Or 57, whatever. Like, I think Pete's making the right move where the team building philosophy is let's get competent, because we know what it looks like when we're not. Everyone gets fired. Pete's been fired 3 times now by different NFL teams. Job security is part of his thought process. So, yeah, he's got competence. He doesn't need to force a draft pick, but he can still take a guy if he likes him. I really do think the Raiders are winning.
Yeah, and on the contract piece, I will say, like, in terms of the Raiders' willingness to do that, from what I've gathered, it seems like it's probably going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of a 3-year deal, which is, what Geno signed with the Seahawks the last time he re-ups. And that kind of 40 to 45 million price range that he's been asking for, I think the Raiders probably settle in somewhere around 40 million per year, which, like you said, that'd be tied with Matthew Stafford. We got to see what his restructured deal looks like with the Rams. I don't think that's out yet, but right now, Matthew Stafford his average annual salary is 40 million. He's 15th. So I think if you're paying Geno Smith the 15th highest paid quarterback, I think that's more than fine, especially considering the Raiders have $80.8 million in cap space.
Yeah,
And you guys were watching. How many times did AP bench somebody last year? The quarterback, like 12 times. Like just having a guy probably won't be bad enough to get benched is worth 40 mil. Shoot, if I'm the Raiders.
Yeah, I mean, to me, if you get him for 40 mil, that's a bargain. Like you're gonna end up, after Purdy gets his deal, you're telling me he's gonna get paid, like middle of the league as far as the starters go. Like that's, that to me, that's a bargain for a quarterback that I think can play like a top 10 quarterback if you get him behind a good offensive line. I mean, like most people that don't watch Geno might think that's a crazy statement, but like if you watch Geno, the plays he's made, all the things that, like you mentioned, that he's had to dealt with and still put up competent numbers, he's a very good quarterback, and no one's arguing that he's in that Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes range. But he's a very good quarterback. And like you mentioned, the Raiders have been bad. It's okay to try to create a competent team before you go for elite and all those things. But he's a very good quarterback that I think makes the Raiders a competent team, especially if you could get some pass protection behind him. Mina Kimes put out this stat. He's quick pressures are pressures in which a quarterback gets pressured in less than 2.5 seconds. In the last 3 years, he's led the league in quick pressures, and he's been able to deal with it. So the Raiders need to build an offensive line around him. But to me, if you get him for 40 mil, that's a great deal for the Raiders. And our next question: was it a coincidence that DK Metcalf asked for a trade prior to the Smith trade?
Yeah, I'm still trying to sort out the timeline of all this. From what I can tell, at least right now, this is fluid. Right now, it seems like their two trade requests were independent of one another. It doesn't seem like they were tied, which makes sense. They're on different timelines in their careers. What I get from DK, and this is me projecting a little bit, I do know that like he does want to be on a playoff team. Right? Our colleague Diana Rossini reported that too, that he wants to go somewhere and win. That's real. Like DK does want to be on a playoff team, warm weather thing. Like that's real too. And I do think he wants to get paid, but also you got to remember DK made the divisional round his rookie year. They win the NFC West the next year, win 12 games. He goes to the playoffs or goes to the Pro Bowl that year, or he was voted to it. They didn't have one. Then Russ breaks his finger the next year. That kind of smoked the season. Then the very next year, he gets right back to the playoffs. And they were up on the Niners at halftime, in large part because he was balling. And then the next two seasons, like, yo, what are we doing here? Like, I think DK is no different than a lot of fans. Now maybe he jumped the gun a little bit, but he obviously knows more. Like, yo, man, are we really about this winning stuff around here still? Like, what's going on? Because that's what I'm here for. Like, I'm here to win. So I think that would be my guess, and half my guess, half a little bit of my understanding too is like, yeah, the uncertainty of the quarterback situation obviously is going to factor into that, but that's tied to like winning. Like, yo, are we about that? I kind of view, put it this way, I kind of view Geno's request more in the I need the bag type of thing versus I view DK's request more like the Myles Garrett type of thing. Where it's like, what's the plan here for winning? I'm trying to win. If you guys are about that, cool. If we're not, get me out of here. So that's kind of how I saw the DK thing. I don't know if DK still gets moved. That would be pretty interesting. My guess would be he does. Money talks, but that would be my guess. And even then, like the Seahawks are still going to be trying to win. The problem is for the Seahawks, they're like the Steelers West right now. They're just stuck in that purgatory. Seahawks are good for like 9 games. When you think they're going to win 4, they win 9. When you think they're going to win 12, they win 9. And it's just like that's not enough for some cats. It's not enough for half the fans. So I could easily see how that could not be enough for DK, who thinks he's like that for real.
One of the key figures in this whole thing is Sam Darnold. I mean, obviously, I think Tom Brady wasn't a huge Sam Darnold guy, which is why they went after Stafford. Didn't get Stafford. Geno became Plan B, and now we hear that Sam Darnold may be going to the Seahawks next. So, I guess that begs the question: is Sam Darnold better than Geno Smith, or vice versa? And what do you feel about him as far as joining the Seahawks?
The Sam Darnold thing sounds like a terrible idea. It really does. And not even that Sam's bad. Well, I do think Sam is bad. But let's say he's like, okay. Let's say you can get Minnesota Sam out of Sam. Look what it took to get that out of him, though, in Minnesota. You had like the coach of the year, elite play caller, good offensive line, particularly before Darisaw got hurt in that Rams game, I believe it was. You got good offensive line, good running back, great play caller, great defense, great skill position guys, and he still wet the bed when the stakes were the highest. That's really scary to me. It has less to do with his talent as much as like, yo, you had probably outside of maybe Jalen Hurts, the most quarterback-friendly situation in the NFL last year between all those factors I just named, and he was playing indoors too, which matters, I think. So you got that going for you. And then when the when the money was on the floor, you wet your pants. That scares me because the Seahawks, I would say, along with like the Jets and some other teams at the bottom, have been some of the least quarterback-friendly situations between the instability at play caller, the defense prior to Mike McDonald getting it right after the bye week last year, no run game to speak of. Like all of these things are how Sam Darnold ends up being a journeyman, you know, because he didn't get the help he needed with the Jets or whatever, or how Geno ends up being a journeyman because he didn't get the help or whatever the case may be. Like that's what scares me about Sam. Sam's in that bucket of quarterbacks who was like, all right, if everything's great around you, then you can give us some. You got some juice. But when's the last time everything's been great around a quarterback in Seattle? 2015, maybe? I think that's the last time they had the league's best scoring defense. That was Marshawn's last year, Thomas Rawls' breakout year, and then went to the divisional round. Like, ever since then, Russ was like, yo, where's my help? That's why he axed out of here. Because Seattle hasn't been very quarterback friendly between defense and situation in terms of supporting cast. That's what scares me about Sam. Sam's best 20 throws, like 20 years from now, I show my daughter, like, yo, look at this Sam Darnold kid. And I pull up his best 20 throws. This would be bad parenting on my part. But let's say I do that 20 years from now. Like, Sam, she'd be like, Daddy, is he in the Hall of Fame? Because them best 20 throws are going to look crazy. And then I show you his worst 10 or 20 plays. Or hell, I just show you the Rams game from this year, the playoff one. People are like, oh, okay. Yeah, that's why he's the assistant quarterbacks coach at USC right now. You know, like that's what really worries me about Sam in Seattle. It's just a marriage of situation and player. Because we know Sam's one of those guys who needs everything around him just to get to a competent level.
And then going back to DK for a second, I know it's been reported that the Seahawks were originally looking for, I believe it was a first and a third in return for him. Do you think the Geno Smith trade changes at all what they're looking for in return for him, or even if they will move him, period?
It won't change the return. I don't think so. They're not gonna get that first round pick though. John Snyder knows that. He's a smart dude. You start high. I'm a haggler, you know. I understand how it works. You go in there, like, yo, I need this. You know it's crazy. That's how you work in the middle. So they're not gonna get the first round pick. I don't think this is gonna change their asking price because they don't really want to trade DK. Like my understanding of the situation was that this time last week at the combine, of course teams were calling. Teams been calling John about DK for years. And the answer has been a version of the same thing. Like, yeah, we like the guy, appreciate your interest, but let's see how it goes if we can keep him. You know, let's talk extension with him or something. And if that goes south, we'll get at you. That's kind of been the vibe. And that's why the price is so high. Now, if DK come in and he's like, yo, I want out, which he did, that's different, but that's not going to change the price. They still want value for him. You know, this John Snyder really only has a track record of getting rid of two premier assets when they're still like quote unquote in their prime. It's Frank Clark, that's Russell Wilson. He got a first round pick and change for Frank in 2019, and they got a haul for Russ. John's not in the business of giving away guys because they axe out. That's how you get fired in this business. So no, I don't think that's going to change the asking price, but I do think they're going to have to come way down off that. I think Tashan, the joint you offered me in our beat writer story is probably the best that they could possibly reasonably expect, and that was the Raiders' second round pick this year, and then the third next year. That's probably fair compensation. Maybe they just get a second from someone, and I don't know if this changes their math in terms of their willingness to want to move him. Like they want him, but if he don't want to be here and they can get a good return that gives them a path to getting an impact player, yeah, they'll put a FedEx stamp on his head, just like he was willing to put a FedEx stamp on Sherm's head, Bobby Wagner, Earl Thomas. Like John's let dudes go he feels like it's better than DK, which is why like it's probably no slack for him to just be like, all right, you want out? Somebody throw me something nice. I'll help you pack your bags.
I was gonna on the Raiders side of things in terms of how they landed on Smith as their top option at quarterback. Obviously, they tried to get Stafford last week. That didn't work out. And this week, minority owner Tom Brady came to the team headquarters partly to get Max Crosby's deal done, and we'll talk about that later. He signed a massive 3-year extension, but he also, held a series of meetings focused on quarterbacks with the GM, John Spytek, Pete Carroll, offense coordinator Chip Kelly, and quarterback coach Greg Olsen. And coming out of that meeting, that's when they landed on, all right, let's go try to get Geno. And I think that's notable for Raiders fans who've, obviously we've been reporting for months how involved Tom Brady is in personnel matters, but he's essentially, I wouldn't say leading the quarterbacks meetings, but he's having like a very instrumental role in quarterback meetings, and they go and try to do that. And we saw it with the Stafford situation. He just so happened to run into Stafford at a ski resort in Montana, of course, on accident. And then, this happened. So particularly at quarterback, but also just with the roster in general, I think, Brady's influence we've seen is really clear, and he's going to have an active presence. He's not going to be here every day or anything like that in the offseason, but when it's something big going on, like Max Crosby signing the contract or us figuring out what we're doing at quarterback, that's when he's going to pull up, and basically, help be that voice that they've missed, or at least they felt that they missed as a franchise since Al Davis passed away, over a decade ago. So interesting element for sure. And I kind of transitioning off of that, part of that meeting was, even if they were successful in getting Geno, they were still open in drafting a quarterback as early as the first round in next month's draft. And they had the 6th overall pick. You mentioned earlier kind of how Russ got the job. Like it wasn't really planned for him to get the job. They made a big commitment to Flynn and then drafted Russ, and he just, beat the guy out. So it seems like this kind of aligns with how Pete Carroll operates. Would you say that's the case as well? Just sort of that compete mindset of, even though they traded for Geno and they're going to give him an extension, they're still open to potentially drafting a quarterback at 6.
Oh yeah, and I don't know if we'll do it at 6, but that really is. And as you guys talk to Pete more and more, that compete stuff he talks about is like that's no BS. Like he's for real about everybody's job is up for grabs. That's part of why he lost a lot. I wouldn't say lost the locker room, but that's why he lost some guys in the Legion of Boom era because they felt he went away from that. Like they was like, yo, Kaepernick's on the table. Why don't you bring him in here and let him compete with Russ? And it was like, I don't know about that. Like, we need Russ to be locked in. It was like, well, I thought it was always compete. You drafting corners, even though Sherm's all pro. You drafting safeties, when Earl's all decade. You drafting pass rushers when Cliff Avril's a Pro Bowler. Why not bring in? It's always compete thing supposed to be for everybody. And I don't know if Pete reflects on maybe he felt like he made a mistake on that. That's a question for him. But I do know I know he can recognize the inconsistency in the messaging there. And I'd be surprised if he makes that same mistake in Vegas and like, yeah, we gave Geno a bag, so we can't take Will Howard or whatever in the 2nd or 3rd round. I'd be very surprised. First round, I don't know how they feel about the quarterbacks, but I can easily see Pete being like, yo, yeah, here's Will Howard, pick 68. Here's Geno. Maybe even bring in still got Aiden over there. Yep. All 3 of you guys. Roll the ball out like the Joker in the Dark Knight when he broke the pool stick. All right, we're going to have tryouts. Everybody go. Because that's what he did in 2012. It was Tavares Jackson, Russ, and Matt Flynn said, we got the rook, we got the vet, we got the expensive new guy. Roll the ball out, best man wins. 2 weeks later, Russ won. Because Pete believes deep down that is really how you get the best out of the guys is let me see what happens when you get pushed. Whether you get pushed by the teammate, you get pushed by the front office, you get pushed by the opponent. Just what happens when somebody push you? Do you tuck your tail? Do you rise up? Like one of the things that Pete had in Seattle, which I'm sure he still has in Las Vegas, was a competitor scale. He ranked every player, the coaches did 1 through 7. Now he didn't reveal what players ranked where, but like the 7 was the highest. It was like the ultimate competitor. I think he's only given out 2 of those. The 6 is like right under that. You're the ultimate competitor as well. The difference between 6 and 7 was you're the ultimate competitor at 7 and you bring guys with you. And I bring up that scale because that guy is going to always believe in, I need everybody to feel pushed to be the best version of themselves. And has to be across the board. It has to be. If not, as Pete has saw, your guys will take notice and they will lose that. I think the only difference in the quarterback situation this year is that he knows Geno, where he didn't know Matt Flynn. John Snyder knew Matt Flynn because John came from Green Bay. Pete knows Geno and probably believes in Geno more than anyone outside of Geno's immediate family. Like the way Pete talks about Geno is the way I talk about my daughter. Like Geno really Pete really loved this dude. At some point last year, he was like, yo, Geno's one of my favorite stories. He's one of my favorite players I've ever coached. Pete's been coaching since the 70s. Like for Geno to rank that high, that means a lot. I think if anything, it doesn't stop him from drafting a quarterback, but that may tip the scale in Geno's favor more than it more than like making it a full-on open competition like Matt and Russ was in, whereas Geno's proven he knows him, whereas Matt was coming in. He hadn't even thrown a ball. He had thrown as many passes in the Seahawks uniform as Russ did at the time. But yeah, I think the competition part is really going to fuel Pete because he knows it has to, and he knows what happens if you don't be consistent with that messaging.
Throw in, if they draft a quarterback in the first round after giving this guy $120 million, they pull a Falcons, that'd be nuts. I think that'd be crazy. So that's my 2 cents. Go ahead, Ted.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just, I know a lot of Raider fans are interested in Jackson Dart, and I'm writing a scouting report on him now, and my conclusion is he needs to be Jordan loved. Like he needs like a couple years sitting on the bench, and I think he needs to be drafted to a team with an established quarterback. And now that the Raiders have one that he could sit behind, maybe if you could get him in a third round, that'd be a great pick. And that seems like something Pete Carroll might do. But what makes the relationship between Pete and Geno so strong?
That's a great question. Before that, I want to say if the Seahawks, if the Raiders take a guy at 6 on the Geno front, I think it's important for Raider fans to know about Geno that he's going to handle that a lot better than like Kirk Cousins did. Because Geno's like, God bless his soul, he might be the most confident quarterback in the league. Like, no lie. Like he signed with the Giants because he was like, I can go beat out Eli if they give me a shot. And if you remember, think of how crazy that sounded with how Geno left the Jets and what Eli means to the Giants in 2017. And Geno signing there to be like, I can go beat that guy. And then he did it. And then the coach got fired that ended up playing him. But then he did it. Same logic when he went to the Chargers. He was like, Phillip Rivers is there? Shoot, they give me a shot. I'll go beat him. Now, obviously he didn't, but that was his thought. Same thing in 2019 when he signed with the Seahawks. I know Russ is there. He liked that for real, but so am I. So if they open it up, I can go beat that guy. And Geno's going to have that same mindset. If let's say they draft Shador, right, at 6. He's going to be like, cool, I got comp, roll the ball out, let's rock. Watch what I do. So I do think they'd have they have a better locker room situation than like Atlanta had, where Kirk was like, yo, what's up? I thought I was QB1. Geno's gonna be like, all right, cool. You think the Rook's like that, huh? All right, watch this. He's gonna be out in training camp, first couple of training camp practices, he's gonna be throwing heaters. But to your question, Ted, about what makes the relationship with Geno and Pete so strong is that Pete matches that belief. He's probably the only one who, like I said, believes in Geno that much. But that's Pete's secret, though. Like he gets quarterbacks that just believe in themselves, like at the highest level, like to unlock it from the guy. Geno, he didn't have to unlock it that much, but he just brings it out. He brought it out of Drew Lock. Like the best version of Drew we saw was in Seattle. The best version of Tavares Jackson, because he had played in Minnesota, but the best version we saw was him in Seattle in 2011. The best version we've ever seen of Russ by far was in Seattle. And I think I consider Pete like a QB whisperer, low key. Like he's not in the same vein as like McVay or a Shanahan because it's not schematic, it's personal. And that means a lot to QBs. These guys are like soft, insecure dudes, low key quarterbacks. They need all these assurances that you love them and that they're going to be the guy. You're not going to bring nobody else in to potentially replace them. Like Pete finds a way to still bring dudes in and make them believe. And Geno's been like that from the beginning, and Pete matches that energy in him. He believes in Geno. Geno in 2014 said he's a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback. It was taken as such a blasphemous comment that Rex Ryan had to come out and apologize to. I think he said it in the New York Daily News. Think about that. Your head coach would be like, yo, he didn't really mean that. Chill out. That's nuts. But that's what Geno's always been, and Pete sees him that way. Like we all just want to be seen by someone, it's our employer, our partner, whatever, our family. Pete sees Geno, and that is why I think he's balled out so much for Pete, and I think that's going to be the case, particularly playing indoors. One of you guys can pull it up. I think Mike Sando has a tweet. Geno splits indoors. He's like that. You play outside, not so much, but indoors he be balling. I think that's going to help too.
We'll send you off on this one.
Indoor starts, 14 starts all on a road, 30 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, 110 quarterback rating. Outdoors, 36 starts, 25 at home, 43 touchdowns, 31 interceptions, 89.7 rating. That obviously includes his time with the Jets and all that, but
right,
pretty stark difference.
We'll send you off on this one. Obviously, you know Pete very well. And do you think Pete's going to have success here in Las Vegas, and why?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of that, the personal part is going to bring out the best in guys. And it's not even that like he's going to turn the people into all pros. And I think that's what people hear sometimes when you say I'm bring out the best. Pete's a floor raiser. I've seen so many times where a dude is just unplayable wherever he came from. He's on his 4th team, shows up in Seattle and is like a starting caliber dude. It's most common with DBs. You get like a Michael Jackson who's playing in Carolina right now, but was like unplayable on like 3 teams. Boom, starting caliber. And then it works in the inverse where a guy balls out here and he gets out of Seattle and it's like, yo, why would Byron Maxwell get this contract from the Eagles? Well, it's because he was nice in Seattle. And it's not just DBs, but there's plenty of other examples too. But I think that's going to be the key as a floor raiser. Like all these guys, Pete sees all of them. You're all in the NFL for a reason. You were nice in high school. You were nice in college. Like you're here for a reason. Let's find the reason, whether it's what makes you tick or your athleticism or your strength or whatever. Let's bring that out of you, whatever it is. Just be you. So I think he's going to keep their floor high. And when you do that, I mean, you get the ball to bounce your way a few times. You mess around and be a frisky wild card team. Your team, everyone's like a season away from being 8-8 or 9-8 or whatever. Now they threw the math off, but Pete's really good at that part of it. Is like raising your floor as a team. Like when they traded Russ, they probably in the building was like, oh man, we might this might be an ugly season. And just Pete fucked around and won too many games because he's a floor raiser. I really do believe in that. He's gonna have guys. He's got a foundation as a dude. He's not one of these coaches like Mike McDonald. Maybe not Mike McDonald. Like maybe even Gerard Mayo. Like one of these younger coaches who's still figuring out who they are, which is fine when you're young. But Pete's not that. He knows who he is. He knows who he is to his core so much that like sitting on my desk right now is a book Pete wrote about who he is. That's how much Pete knows his philosophy and how to win. So, and last thing, Pete got a lot of shit in Seattle towards the end for like having an archaic or antiquated way of winning games. No, it's not. Pete believes in winning the turnover margin, running the ball, playing great defense, and having best special teams. Like that's never gonna. That's how you win games in the 50s, in the 70s, in the 2000s, and then in 2058, the Super Bowl winning team is gonna be able to say they did all those things. So Pete knows how to win ball games, and I don't know if he's gonna like win a Super Bowl in Las Vegas. Probably not. But I don't think he's gonna be an immediate upgrade over like all of the coaches they've had in the last however many years. Because Pete's a good football coach, knows how to win.
And then running the football is back more than ever now with the way defenses have gotten smaller and all the best teams are loading up on the offensive line and running the ball, and that's what Pete wants to do. But with that said, thank you so much for joining us. Just reading the comments, a lot of our listeners are appreciative of the inside information, and that was great. Thank you.
Appreciate you guys. Make sure Tashan's drinking a beer the next episode, please.
Go to hell and have a good day.
All right, y'all. Peace.
Thanks, man.
Sean's Hennessy only. All right, later.
All
right. How do we get
see
back to our 3 square? Oh, there we go.
We'll just do this one.
All right. Cool. All right. Before we get into the rest of our pod, I just want to give my scouting report on Geno Smith real quick. I think there's a perception out there that Geno is middle tier to bad quarterback. I think a lot of that comes from his time with the Jets. And he had some bad moments in NFL. There's no doubt about that. But when you look at what he did in Seattle, dealing with the most quick pressures any quarterback, pressures under 2.5 seconds, had to deal with the last 3 seasons, 2 bad offensive coordinators, Shane Waldron, who got fired immediately after going to the Bears, and a failed experiment in Ryan Grubb, a college to NFL guy. No running game. He did have good receivers in Seattle, but just the way he dealt with pressure, and Benjamin Solak put out these stats in 2024, which was a down year for him, on pure dropbacks, non-play action, non-screens, non-garbage time. He was 8th in success rate, 13th in EPA per dropback, 3rd on target rate, 5th in completion percentage over expectation, 1st in explosive pass rate. The turnovers are problems. He does try to force the ball, especially in the red zone, a little too much, which is why it's important to build a strong run game around him. But, I mean, to me, if you get a good run game and a decent offensive line, I don't think you need like a monster offensive line because he just hasn't even had a decent offensive line. to me, he could play like a top 10 quarterback. So I think this is a big get for the Raiders. I think Seattle kind of gave up on him after just not giving him a lot to work with. And if he gets paid around $40 million and ends up being paid like a middle tier quarterback, that's a huge win for the Raiders. So to me, I think this is going to be a big upgrade for the Raiders, and I think Raider fans should be really excited.
I think there's definitely a narrative about Geno Smith. Like all of a sudden, everyone's like saying he's great and he's been underrated. I mean, like no one thinks Geno's bad. I think Geno's fine, but I think people are kind of overlooking. He had three great receivers. I mean, I know the O line wasn't great, but he had a great running back. I mean, I think Geno's got there's a little bit of the blame also, but again, he's fine. I think he's definitely a top 14 quarterback, which is definitely better than they've had. But I think all these, the same people who used to defend Sam Darnold now all hate Sam Darnold. They all look at the metrics and numbers, and they used to be like, "Oh, Sam Darnold's really good," and he's fine also. But Geno Smith, I think, all of a sudden now everyone's like, "Oh, he's really, really good. He's great. He's fine. I think he's good." And I think he had three great receivers. I think people kind of overlooked that when they look at his numbers the last few years.
I mean, I don't know. I think like the offensive line problems have been pretty legit. They haven't been able to run the ball either, so it's been a lot on his shoulders. And also with the Darnold comparison, like my thing with Darnold, it was 1 year and not even a full year because by the end of the year he started looking like Sam Darnold again. Like Geno Smith he's been a good quarterback for 3 seasons in a row now, so I feel pretty confident that he's legitimately good. Like how good is he? I don't know, 11th, 12th best quarterback in the league on a good day, but that's better than anything the Raiders have had since they made the decision to bench and release Derek Carr, who was also, at times an 11th to 12th best quarterback in the league. And, how much that matters, I don't know. Like I know Geno Smith is better than Derek Carr today, or at least the last time we saw Derek Carr. And, he's much better than Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew or Desmond Ridder. So I think, when it comes to their priorities, trying to compete right away this year, you need at least a capable quarterback that you can count on to be consistent in order to do that. And I think they landed that in Geno, and we'll see what happens with his contract extension. But it could be if it's a 3-year deal and 1.5 or 2 years are guaranteed, it's a big commitment in terms of the money, but timeline wise, it's really not a huge one because you can move on as soon as next season. If it doesn't go well this year, and if you do end up drafting a quarterback, in the first 3 rounds this year, maybe that guy's ready to roll as soon as next year, So I think it's a fine move. It's not as sexy as Matthew Stafford would have been, or maybe not as nice as it would be to draft Cam Ward, but they have to be realistic, where they're at, the options that are available on the market, and they're picking 6 overall, so they can't really. Cam Ward and Schroeder could be going by then, and maybe even Jackson Dart. I don't know. People getting crazy with him getting mocked high up, so don't want to get stuck in a situation like last year where they didn't really get an answer in free agency. Well, they got one, but he wasn't the answer. And then in the draft, by the time they got on the clock, everybody was gone. And Brock Bowers paid off great, but they were 4-13. So you need at least a solid quarterback, particularly in the AFC and the AFC West specifically, to be able to compete in the way that they want to. So I don't see it. And it's a 3rd-round pick, So I basically traded Geno Smith for Devontae Adams. Devontae Adams didn't want to be here, so I think getting a starting quarterback for a guy that didn't want to be here is pretty smooth.
Yeah, and I mean before the trade, like all the the film watching community, they all love Geno Smith. So I mean, I was a big fan. I think
they all love Sam Darnold too. The last 3 or 4 years. That's all I heard. Oh,
no,
come on.
The opinions about Sam Darnold has always been very up and down. There's some like people that like Sam Darnold as like a kind of a novelty. Like we hope he does good, but like nobody really is in love with Sam Darnold. But I think Geno Smith has. I mean, to me, I think if you put the right pieces around him, you're going to have top 10 quarterback type of play. I mean, he does a great job mitigating pressure. He got drafted in the 1st round because he has really good arm talent. I mean, that you're going to see that right off the bat. And going forward, I think you do need to make sure that the offensive line gets some upgrades. I know some people are pushing for Ashton Genty at 6, but to me, you don't fix a bad run game by plugging in a running back. Running backs don't fix bad run games. Saquon Barkley couldn't fix the Giants. So they bolster good run games. You put them behind an average to good offensive line to make them a lot better. But I think you need to address his offensive line. And I think with 6, you have potential to do that, or you could fix the defense. And you could get a good running back in the 2nd round. I mean, I think there's at least 5 good starting running backs in this draft. This is a very running back rich draft. As far as getting a number one receiver, I think it would be nice, but I don't think it's necessary. I mean, Brock Bowers is your number one receiver. Maybe you get Tyler Lockett to in a mix with what the Raiders already have, and I think that's a pretty good receiving core. I mean, obviously you want a number one, but I don't think you need to break the bank and invest a ton of capital into getting one this year. I think this year you want to build out that running game.
They bring in Tyler Lockett, man. So I'm a little underwhelmed. When Tom Brady came in, if they said, "Hey, I'm going to bring back the 2023 Seahawks, that's what we're going to be next year," would you be excited about that? Like, we're going to be the Seattle team from 2 years ago that were 9-8 and got the coach fired. It just seemed like, again, it's a fine move. I think I get it. You're desperate. I mean, you're all in on Stafford, didn't work out. You don't want Brady didn't like Sam Darnold. Fine. So I don't know. I just don't know if these are the moves you want to make. Kicking off a new regime. Like, I'm supposed to be excited about Pete Carroll and Geno Smith, and again, they're fine. They're better. They're competitive, I guess. But in this division, you're still fourth place, I think. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
I mean, like, what could they do that would be exciting, like in terms of like the options that are available?
I mean, I think you could. Again, I may be in the minority where I think a 27-year-old Sam Darnold if it's the same price range, is probably better than a 34-year-old Geno Smith. I think getting Shadur Sanders, again, Brady knows him best, but if you get a guy with some upside in the first round, maybe that's better. I just think they're I'm not saying this is a bad move. I'm just saying that it doesn't really excite me. I think it's fine. I think it's a good move, but I wouldn't say, I mean, I think it's funny the people are saying how great Geno Smith is. And again, he's good, but I think we'll see. I'm curious what happens next in free agency and how this year plays out as far as how competitive they are.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Sam Darnold, it's not like I don't feel like Sam Darnold's as bad as maybe what Michael said and maybe some detractors have said. I think he has potential. Like, he's 27 years old. He had the best season he's ever had. So there is upside there, but at the same time, is only 1 year in one of the best situations you can be in as a quarterback, and he really crumbled against pressure in those last two games. So that's pretty concerning. And I would have loved if they had a chance to get Cam Ward, but to me, Shadur Sanders is just not that guy. Like, he's not a first round pick to me. He'll probably end up getting picked in the first round because of quarterback desperation, but just watching the film, like, there's just not first round traits to me. And I think a lot of teams are feeling that way. I talked to Dane Brugler about it. There's plenty of teams that have much lower grades than a first round grade on Shadur. So feelings on him are mixed. I think picking him at 6 would have been a pretty big reach in my opinion. But I mean, to me, like, getting Geno Smith of all the options available to them is probably the best route they had.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm taking Geno over Sam Darnold any day of the week. Like, for one, Sam Darnold, again, like 1 year, and he looks like, it's not just like he's been okay the rest of the time. Like, he's been awful the rest of the time besides that, like, 10-game stretch this year. Whereas Geno Smith's been good for 3 years in a row. Like, I think the fluke percentage with Darnold is a lot higher than it is with Geno Smith. And I know Darnold's 27, but I think he pretty much is who he is. Like, those habits and those traits that come out when things aren't ideal, that's Sam Darnold. And like the Raiders, we're going to get into it later, but the Raiders aren't some ready to go situation. It's going to be an issue for Geno Smith too. Like, they need to invest in the interior of the offensive line, start running back, number one receiver. We'll see what happens with the defense. Basically, the whole defense is sitting free agency. Like, so this roster needs a lot of work regardless of who the quarterback is. And so I just don't think that they would be able to, like Michael Sean was saying earlier, I don't think they'd be able to replicate, let's say, the situation that the Vikings had last season, this offseason, even with them having the resources that they do have, just because this roster needs so much work. Like, even before Darnold had that season, the Vikings had been a successful program for a couple of years under Kevin O'Connell. Like, there was a baseline they were starting from, whereas the Raiders, they were a 4-win team last season. Like, they were a terrible football team, and injuries played a big part of that. Bad coaching played a big part in that, but I don't know. I think Darnold is a move. Is if everything else is great and you just need, a slight improvement at quarterback, and your quarterback was stinky or something like that, I think that's fine. But I just think with a team like the Raiders that are just trying to get to a certain baseline, I think that's the type of swing that gets you burned in the end.
Yeah,
we're going to find out, because obviously if the Seahawks get Sam Darnold, it'll be a great comparison a year from now to see, because they obviously won him over Geno Smith for the money. So I think we'll see which team was right. And I think Geno Smith is a good quarterback. I'm not saying that. So I think I get the move, and I think it makes sense.
All right, let's talk about other notable transaction. The Raiders signed guard Alex Kappa and release center Andre James. Kappa was legitimately one of the worst starting guards in the league last year, but some of that might have to do with injuries. Obviously, he has experience and a connection with Spytech from their time in Tampa Bay, and he was a very good guard in Tampa Bay, one of the top guards in the league. So maybe there's some intel there that he thinks that he can bounce back from injuries. I think he has 5.5 guaranteed on his contract, right?
Yeah, for 2 years.
So it's not like a guy that could just cut in training camp if they don't like him. So there's little bit of a commitment there. But what do you guys think about Kappa? Do you think he could bounce back from injury and potentially be a starting guard for the Raiders?
Yeah, I think it's a fine move. Like you mentioned, Spytek knows him well. I think he's coming in. They'll bring back Jordan Meredith and they got Dylan Parham. So like the whole compete thing, you'll have 3 guys, I think, competing for 2 spots. And I think the third guy would be a fine backup, I think. So I think Kappa, I know he had some bad numbers last year, but he's still a very experienced guy who knows, what's going on up front. So I think I wouldn't be surprised if he was starting, if one of the 2 guys starting. But again, he'll compete, and we'll see what happens with Meredith, who I thought had a good year last year, and Dylan Parham, who's very solid. I don't know if he's ever been the guy that people thought he was going to be coming out of the draft, but he's definitely a very solid player.
Yeah, I don't know about Kappa. I know he had a bad foot injury in 2022 and was never really the same after that with the Bengals. I think internally the belief is, health, and then also just the situation with the Bengals, passing the ball as often as they did, and kind of putting the offensive line in disadvantageous situations and kind of having an inconsistent run game. Like, I think maybe it's more of the surrounding than it is him. And they made a pretty decent investment in him, $11 million over 2 years. So I think the expectation is for him to start. And he's been a guy that typically starts at right guard, I believe, for most of his career. And so we probably see Dylan Parham kicking over to left guard, or maybe Jordan Meredith kicking over to left guard, because Jackson Powers-Johnson's moving to center. Like, that's pretty clear. Like, you don't release Andre James and for a marginal cap savings unless you feel confident that JPJ is going to be your center of the future. I still think, like, if I was them, I would probably like explore my options of trying to make add some sort of like difference maker at guard, because even if Kappa like is an okay starter this year, like, he's older and he's not going to be like a long-term answer at guard. And I think they need like a guy they can depend on at this spot moving forward. And so I don't know if there's a guy like that in free agency. I'd have to look. But maybe a guy in the draft early on in those first 3 rounds, they could land a guard that could be, a dude in the way that they think Jackson Powers-Johnson is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely some good guards in free agency. Not any like elite tier guards, but I'm blanking on his name right now. Played for the Eagles. Mekhi Becton is a free agent. Obviously had a really good year, moving from tackle to guard. Will Fries is a good guard. The guy from the Bears that gets injured a ton. Tevin Jenkins. I mean, Tevin Jenkins dealt with a lot of injuries, but when he's on the field, I mean, he has potential to be an elite guard as well. So there's some interesting names in free agency. Not any like Trey Smith types who got franchise tagged by the Chiefs. But there could be some potential starting guards in the free agent market. But I mean, the way guards are getting paid, it's not going to be cheap. So moving on from that, the structure, you want to talk about the structure of Geno Smith potential deal?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just a start. Like, for people that don't know, like, the way free agency is going to work next week, like, the legal tampering period starts on Monday at, I believe it's 9 a.m. Pacific time. And that's basically when teams can start agreeing in principle to deals with free agents. And Wednesday morning is when deals can become official, essentially. And so, Monday is when you'll start seeing the reports leak about whatever transactions that have been made. And as of right now, the Raiders have about $80 million in cap space, according to Over the Cap. So they should be a very active team. I think they have top, second or third most cap space in the league. So we'll see what they do with it. But I think that the structure of the Geno's going to get an extension. I think the structure of it is going to be the intriguing part. And the deadline for them to get a deal done is essentially March 16th, because he has a $16 million roster bonus due then. And so if they're going to give him a new deal, it probably needs to happen before then from a contractual standpoint for it to make sense for them. with the Max Crosby extension, which you mentioned earlier, a 3-year deal worth over $100 million in added money. So now he's under contract through 2029. They front loaded that contract, which is usually the opposite of what we see. We see guys get these big contracts and then it lowers the year one hit to create cap space. Max Crosby's contract actually reduced their cap space because they loaded the cap hit mostly into this year and next year, and I don't think he has any guaranteed money after 2026 as a result of that. And so I'm interested to see if they do that same sort of thing with the Geno deal, just to sort of put it all up front, and like if it doesn't work out, then they can move on, more easily in the future. And I also think that's kind of a signal of probably what they think about this free agent class. Like I know they still have a lot of cap space at $80 million, and they can create more if they need it, but like I said, typically teams want to create more cap space, not eat into it when they're doing these kind of big extensions. And so I think it goes to show like there's probably not that many guys worth giving huge contracts on free agency this year, just as a result of a lot of guys getting re-signed earlier and getting franchise tags. So I'll be interested to see how exactly they structure that Smith extension.
Yeah, and smart for them to get ahead of the curve and give Max Crosby the extension before guys like Trey Hendrickson got extended and Michael Parsons got extended, because he's only getting more expensive if you wait it out. And it seemed like the Bengals saw the Max Crosby extension and was like, oh, screw that. Trey Hendrickson, go look for a trade partner. So good job by Spytech and the front office getting that done. Do you guys have any inkling to what free agents the Raiders might want to keep, or if they already kind of told some guys that they might be let go? Like I think there was a report out there that they're probably not going to bring Nate Hobbs back.
I mean, that report, I don't really know where that came from. I have been told that's not been decided or anything like that. They technically really can't do that until Monday, but they're obviously talking to agents. Every team is doing that. But, I think the guys, we've talked about it before. I would be like pretty shocked if Robert Spillane walks out of the door, just given how good he's been for this defense the last 2 years. Patrick Graham being back as defense coordinator, the relationship that they have with one another. The inside linebacker market. I know that Zach Bond got a pretty big deal. I think $17 million per year, but I don't think Spillane's going to get that much money. But I think he's earned himself a pay raise for sure, and he's going to get a nice contract. But I think the Raiders should be able to afford to bring him back pretty easily. Trayvon Merrick, I think, is the biggest threat to get poached by somebody else. I think he played at a really high level last season, and typically safeties at that caliber get big money, and maybe the Raiders, Vic has talked about this a lot, maybe the Raiders aren't willing to go to a certain place to bring him back. And Nate Hobbs is another guy. He's gotten a lot of interest from other teams. I reported after the combine, there's been some teams interested in potentially paying him as much as $10 million per year, which is kind of similar to that Kenny Moore deal that the Colts gave him to play nickel for them a couple of years ago. So I would say, Merrick, Hobbs, and Spillane are probably the three big money guys in terms of 8-figure contracts. The rest of the guys, the Devon Diablos of the world, Lamont Chason, John Jenkins, Adam Butler Jr. are probably going to be, 1-year deal type guys, maybe 2-year deals for maybe a guy like Diablo or Chason, who's a little bit younger. And then the wild card, I would say, is Malcolm Kuntz, just because he played at a really high level to end 2023, but he missed all of last season because he suffered a torn ACL in practice before the Week 1 game against the Chargers. But he's a 25-year-old pass rusher who has a lot of juice. Those guys typically get paid, but he's only had one good NFL season, essentially, and he's coming off a major knee injury. And he's more of a 3-4 outside linebacker type of guy than a traditional defensive end, so he doesn't fit everybody's system. So I'm kind of interested to see what his market is. I think he's the big question mark to kind of see if they're able to bring him back.
I'd watch the Patriots with Spillane. I think that could be a team that causes some trouble for the Raiders. I think clearly he and Patrick Graham are super tight. I think they both want to come back, but obviously into the market, you have to see what happens. And the closer we get to Monday, and these players don't get re-signed by their current teams, and you hear more noise and hear some numbers, and maybe you want to see what you're worth. So I think that's a danger for the Raiders, because they've said they want to bring back these guys on defense. They have 8 starters from last year who are free agents. They want to bring most of those guys, if not all, back. But it might be tough. Like, you never know what the prices are going to be till you get to that day. And I think one of the dangers of it being not a great free agent class is a lot of these guys are like, you know what, I'm gonna be higher. I'll be like towards the top of this class more than I would be in a better year. So like a guy like Merrick and Spillane, all of a sudden they're top 30 free agents, in a year that's not great. So then I might get some more money from a team who has a lot of salary cap space, because all these teams have more space now and they need guys. So I think ideally the plan is to bring those guys back in defense, but you never know. The closer we get to next week, I think a guy like Spillane could walk.
kind of interesting. Running backs are getting paid a little bit more now. Saquon Barkley just got a nice little contract extension, or his contract reworked. Linebackers getting paid, like you guys mentioned. Zach Bond is getting paid, but other linebackers have gotten pretty nice extensions too. So Spillane is probably going to command around $8 million to $12 million average per year. I would think the Raiders could definitely do that. But we'll see if, like you said, the Patriots might want to outbid them. But I think, linebackers are more important now, that their value is up, especially with having to stop the run, and teams are wanting to run in the ball a little bit more now. So, I think to me, they got to try to find a way to bring Spillane back. As far as other needs the Raiders have that they can address in free agency, we talked about guards and the potential there. They need a running back. They need a wide receiver and cornerback. Any potential free agents that you think the Raiders could be interested in?
Yeah, the top guy on their board at cornerback right now is Byron Murphy from the Vikings. From what I've been told, both team and league sources, and he played at a pretty high level for them last season, and the Raiders should be aggressive in trying to land him on Monday. I'm sure the Vikings want to bring him back too, as well, of course, given how well he played last season. But some other cornerbacks of note that are on the market: Carlton Davis, who played well for the Lions before suffering an injury late in the season, and then DJ Reed with the Jets, who he may have already agreed to an extension with the Jets. He tweeted this little meme thingy the other day that seemed to indicate that he's already coming back. So maybe DJ Reed actually isn't available. So Byron Murphy, I think, would be the top option at cornerback. And then receiver, we mentioned it earlier, and I know, Ted, you feel like they don't necessarily need the number one receiver, but I think they do feel that way. Whether it's been their interest in potentially trading for DK Metcalf. In my opinion, the best receiver on the market is a guy that's not coming back, Devontae Adams. But another guy who fits that number one receiver mold, or could, I guess we haven't seen him in that role in a little bit, is Chris Godwin, who is hitting the market coming off injury with the Bucs. But obviously he has a lot of familiarity with Tom Brady from winning a Super Bowl with him. John Spytek, who was also part of the franchise at the time. He should get a pretty hefty contract, even though he's coming off an injury. And, I guess you could debate, is he a true number one receiver? How much better is he than Jacoby Myers? But I do think he makes the room better either way you land on it. So I think those two guys, Byron Murphy and Chris Godwin, are kind of the guys I have circled as potential splash signings, maybe day one free agency signings.
Godwin is going to be expensive. Yeah. I know that. There's going to be a lot of demand for Godwin. He's by far the top receiver in this free agent class, and there's going to be a lot of teams.
He's by far better than Devontae, or just mean because he won't come to the Raiders?
Oh, it's Devontae's not going to the Raiders.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's get into some fan questions. First, I want to shout out Catholic Raider for a $50 donation. Probably our biggest donation to date. So thank you for that, and thank you for the compliment on the content. BBW Enjoyer. Sorry, I read that out before
That's a crazy name.
Realized what the name was, but he asked. He donated $5 and asked, "Do you think the Raiders will make a play for Lockett or DK Metcalf now?"
I think Lockett makes sense. He's not going to be expensive, and Pete loves him. I think Metcalf is going to be popular. You hear of the Patriots a lot the last few weeks about the Patriots really want him, and they're going to give him whatever he wants, I think. So I think he goes somewhere for a healthy trade compensation and a healthy contract. So I don't believe the Raiders are in that boat right now, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I just don't think the Raiders need to splurge on a number one receiver. I really think that the top priority should be building out the offensive line and getting a good running back behind that offensive line and helping Geno with that. I do think Brock Bowers is your number one, and you can have a good passing game with Bowers as your number one. I think Lockett makes a ton of sense. I don't think he'll be too expensive. Obviously, there's a lot of familiarity there with Geno and Pete Carroll. So to me, that would be my top priority. Metcalf would be nice. Don't get me wrong, but I just think giving a second round pick, or what was your offer for DK, Sean?
It was this year's second and next year's third.
Yeah, to me, you could get a pretty good player in the second round. I don't know if I would.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is like this. I know like all the last like basically 5 receiver classes in a row have been really great, and we've gotten used to that. But this year's really isn't. And I think McMillan, the receiver out of Arizona, I don't think he's a guy that's really going to be in play at number 6, and he's not going to be there in the second round. And so, if you feel like you need a number 1 guy, it's going to have to be a veteran guy. And I think where they're at cap wise, like again, they have $80 million in cap space, and like even if they re-sign all those big name guys that they have on defense earlier, they're still going to have like $40-50 million in cap space, most likely, depending on how they structure those deals. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with splurging on a number 1 receiver if you feel like that guy is truly a number 1 option, whether that's Chris Godwin, whether that's DK Metcalf, like Tyler Lockett. Maybe that's just a guy like if you whiff on trading for Metcalf and you get outbid for Godwin, I don't think Lockett should be crazy expensive, but I do think he's an upgrade over Trey Tucker for sure. As an outside receiver, and it shouldn't be too pricey. I think he's going to be better than probably most receivers that are going to be available in the second or third round.
I will say Godwin's a spike take guy, so you have that. That's definitely a plus. I think he'd be great in that Chip Kelly offense. You can use him different ways. I mean, you saw some of that the last few years in Tampa, but he's a guy definitely very versatile, can move around and do all kinds of things. So, I mean, it'd be a great fit if you want to spend the money. It'd definitely be a huge addition for him.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think you want to use that first and second round. To me, I think the first pick go with Armand Membu, the tackle from Mizzou, Tashan's alma mater. I think he's top tackle in the draft. Get him, plug him on the right side, and then in a second round, you go get a running back. Maybe a Marion Hampton will be available in the second round, but if not, there's still plenty of good running backs you can get in the second round, and you get those 2 guys with maybe a free agent guard. I think this run game could be good, and I think that's the number 1 thing that could really help out Geno to me. But we'll see what happens. All right, next question from Tyler. Now that Geno has been traded, I have 2 questions. How much money is Geno going to get guaranteed in your guys' eyes? And do you think we will resign any of our current free agents like Spillane? Talked a little bit about the free agents already, but what do you guys think the guarantees on Geno's contract will look like?
Well, I think kind of using that, I'm just kind of stuck on that number of $40 million per year. Like, let's say that's the number he gets. Like, let's say it's 3 years, $120 million. I think guaranteeing like half of it, is works. Like $60 million. Basically like a year and a half of guarantees on that contract. I think that makes Geno happy. He gets a nice paycheck, and it also allows the Raiders to remain flexible as soon as 2026. If they draft a rookie and they think he's ready next year to take over as a starter, or if they, end up making a move to get a rookie quarterback or a veteran quarterback next offseason. So I think that's like a fair deal, and I think that falls in line with what the market is going to be for a quarterback of his caliber. Top 15 at least type quarterbacks. Like that's probably what you're going to have to pay. So I think that kind of a deal would make sense.
A little higher. I'll say 45 a year, and I'll say 75 guaranteed.
All right. Next question from Carlos and Fuego. I got to read these names a lot more carefully now. Your thoughts, move back Jason Dart's rookie backup until it's time, pick up extra picks. I think Carlos is saying move back in the first round, but I have a very hard time with Jackson Dart being drafted in the first round. To me, I think you need the Jordan Love plan with Jackson Dart, and I like the tools a lot. I mean, watching the film, the tools are there. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if a team kind of convinced themselves to reach for him the first round, but to me, he's a guy that needs to sit and really learn an NFL offense, has a lot to work on as far as footwork, timing, those things, but the tools are there. Big mobile quarterback, a lot of arm talent. I just thought, watching his film and writing a scouting report, that he needs a couple years to sit, and he needs to be on a team that has an established quarterback. The Raiders now have a quarterback he can sit behind for at least a year or 2. So I think that would work, but I would preferably want to get him in the third round, and I'm sure he might get drafted earlier than that. And if he does, then you could still get Will Howard in the third round. So I wouldn't be too worried about losing Jackson Dart in the third round, but I do like him. I just think he needs to sit.
Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah, you got it.
I'm not a big Dart guy. I think Dart, He's fine. I think he's definitely probably the third, fourth quarterback in this draft. But it is a bad draft class. I think I watch him. I think the windup is too long. The ball gets out late. I don't think he the NFL adjustment will be tough for him. I just think obviously he has a little arm talent. He's got the swag, but to me, he's not really worthy of being a first round pick. So I would not trade down for him. I would do like you're saying. I'm not sure about Howard either. I might go Tyler Shuck in round 4 is a guy that might look as a young guy with some potential. But yeah, I think Dart to me, it's the price tag is too much for where he's going to be going in the draft.
Yeah, I'm not taking him in the first round. I don't care if I trade back or not. But yeah, nah. I mean, second round maybe I think about it, but also coming out of the combine, like, and we reported this, but I think Dart, coming from that system, that Lane Kiffin system, I think it'd be a pretty big adjustment for him in terms of grasping NFL level concepts, and I think that was reflected in his draft meetings during combine week. And so I'd be hard to see it, but I do think they do have some day 2 quarterbacks that they would be intrigued in. Jalen Milroe, we've talked about him. Quinn Ewers from Texas. Will Howard, we keep talking about his connection to Chip Kelly. So I think there's guys that would make sense, whether it's as early as a second round or maybe somewhere in the third round for them to pick up and take a swing on. And they don't have to force it, and I think Jackson Dart in the first round is forcing it.
Yeah, we talked about Milroe, a guy who has a high ceiling and will take a long time. Now you have time. You got Geno Smith, so you have a couple years where you can sit and learn and watch and work on his mechanics with Chip Kelly. So I don't know how high he's going to go, but I think in terms of did really well in all the interviews. Teams raved about him in the chalkboard stuff. He's got special talent running the ball. He's got a big arm. Just needs to work on the accuracy in the short passing game, and he's got a lot to learn at this level, but. I think again the ceiling is very high for a guy you can have now sit for a couple of years actually and learn from Geno Smith.
All right, we got another question from a name I will not say again, but $2. Thank you. What are your thoughts on Will Campbell at 6? Will Campbell has very short arms, which there's a certain threshold with tackles that he's fallen under. But I think he's good enough athlete to play tackle in the league. And he's an extremely smart player. He's probably a good enough athlete to move to the right if you wanted him to. I haven't gone through a ton of games with Will Campbell, but I think, like I said, I would love. I think tackle at 6 is a good pick. So whether you have Will Campbell rated ahead of Armand or Armand rated ahead of Will Campbell, I think getting an offensive lineman at a premium position at that spot is a good pick.
Yeah, I don't know. I've kind of come around on like just running it back with DJ Glaze, honestly, and Thayer Munford as your swing tackle. Like I don't know what DJ Glaze's ceiling is, but I thought he had a solid rookie season. Kind of unexpectedly becoming a year 1 starter, and I kind of want to see what he has. I'm not saying that you just shouldn't consider adding a tackle at all, but in the first round, I think I'd probably look at another position if I have a similarly graded player. But especially if it's a guy that has to make a position change, I think that'd just be a little bit much for me in the first round.
Yeah, I think with DJ Glaze, like he's at least a good swing tackle and solid starter. But I think if you could have a chance to get a star at that position, you should try. But I don't know how the Raiders' new regime feels about Glaze and where his ceiling is. Have you guys talked to
Pete
anybody?
Carroll at the combine when he had his little scrum with us, he was the first guy that he mentioned on the offensive line. I'm not saying that he thinks he's the best guy on the offensive line, but he mentioned him as somebody that stood out last year. Him, Jackson Powers Johnson, and Cole Miller. So I think they like him at least. I don't think we didn't ask him specifically about DJ Glaze. He kind of just offered it up himself. So I think they at least think he's solid.
Yeah, I like Campbell fine, but I think there's probably 7 or 8 elite guys in this draft. I'm not sure he's one of them, so I probably wouldn't take him at 6. But I get the idea. I think bringing a tackle in to compete with DJ would be a great move, whether it's first round, second round, third round, or even a free agent guy. But I think DJ Glaze has earned a chance to compete for the job. That's what Pete's all about. So I think you add someone else to the mix and let them go at it.
I wonder if Glaze has some potential to kick down to guard if they want him to. I think there were some people talking about him as a guard during the draft process as well.
Yeah, he played some guard in college. I'm pretty sure. I can't remember if it was left or right guard, but he played some guard in college. I'm pretty sure.
I thought we were set at guard. We got Kappa. We're set. We got Kappa. We got Meredith. We got Parham. Locked in. Next.
Yeah.
He's gonna have to make a huge jump from last year to be a good starting guard, but we'll see. Pete. All right, last question from Dylan. What do you think the floor is for how many games they win next season? Does this move keep them in quarterback purgatory? Always a dangerous game to predict the floor for how many games a team should win that has been bad for so long. But I think Geno makes them competent, and he elevated a Seahawks team that definitely had a lot of problems to not 9-10 that 9-10 win range. NFC West is a pretty tough division too, so I think they're at least an 8. I'll put the floor at 8. Maybe that might sound crazy, but I'll put the floor at 8.
I'll say.
And they say I'm
7.
a hater too, so
I'll say 7. I think 7 is a solid floor. The roster is totally incomplete right now, but I think between the $80 million that they have and all the draft capital they have, like obviously they're going to add some players, and so they're going to fill a lot of those holes that they have. But it's really just for me a bet on Pete Carroll, just bringing them up to a level of competency that they haven't had in recent years. And I do think that, assuming health, which you can never really assume in the NFL, they have a top 15 quarterback. They have, at least a top 3 to 5 edge rusher in the league, top 10 defensive tackle, maybe top 3 tight end. Like they have some talent across the board and whatever else they add, throughout the draft and free agency, to where I think 7 wins it's not a good season. Don't get me wrong. Like it's not like they're going to be like popping champagne if they win 7 games, but I think that's like a realistic floor for this team in 2025.
Yeah, I was gonna be negative, but I'm cool with 7. I think the Pete Carroll factor definitely is worth something. I think they lost a lot of close games last year, and you could look at the coaching maybe as a reason for some of that. So I think that will help them right there. I think Christian Wilkins coming back is a big deal. He and Max Crosby, when they were together, they were kind of a special duo, and that could be something that kind of really carries the defense, makes things easier for the guys behind them. So I think that duo is pretty impressive to me up front, and we'll see what else they do. But I think 7. I think Geno Smith is fine. I think 7's a good number for a floor. And again, I guess the goal is to be more competitive and to get back in the mix, and they should be able to do that even if they make some non-splashy moves in free agency.
yeah. And as far as the quarterback purgatory thing, the Raiders were going to make a quarterback move. They're not interested in a rebuild, especially with Pete Carroll in a mix now. So they're going to make a quarterback move, whether it was Sam Darnold or Justin Fields or somebody. They were going to try to get somebody in there. I think as far as those veteran quarterback options, like we mentioned, Geno's the best that you can get. I mean, to me, Matt Stafford was never leaving the Rams, but he maybe he probably considered it, but it just didn't seem like a move that made a lot of sense for both parties. So to me, I think as far as the veteran quarterback route goes, Geno Smith is the best get you're going to get, and the floor is there. They're not going to be picking. They're probably not going to be picking in the top 10 next year or the year after, unless there's some devastating injuries. So I guess they are in a bit of a quarterback purgatory, as you mentioned, but you could still get a guy that you could develop, middle first round or second round if you feel like you want to go down that route. And like we talked about with Michael, he doesn't think that Geno would react adversely to doing something like that.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they're in quarterback purgatory. I wouldn't use that phrasing, because I don't think the commitment to Geno is going to be one that hamstrings them beyond this season. Really, they could probably move on from the deal as soon as next year, depending on how it's structured. And like I don't know, like 7 wins. I think the Jets have 7 wins or something like that, and they're picking 8th this year. So you could have a top 10 pick next year, potentially, and be in range to maybe swing a trade up to go get Arch Manning or whoever the top quarterback is. So I think it's fine. I think they maintain flexibility while also giving themselves a chance to compete this year.
Yep. All right. Well, we have ran pretty long. An hour and 15 minutes might be a record for the Just Win podcast, but pretty big move. Thank you so much for joining us today. It looked like we had a pretty big audience. Thank you for donations. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Just Win podcast on YouTube. Leave a comment and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Again, very thankful for all your support, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
All right, y'all.
All right, Pastor.
I forgot how we end this.